Hi, okay, welcome to the second presentation today. My name's David. This is going to be based around fruits and vegetables. Please watch the first introductory video where there's a disclaimer, this isn't medical advice, and there's a little bit of background information with regards to the Eat Well Guide. With regards to the Eat Well Guide, we're looking at the green section obviously today. That represents at least a third of the plate, and therefore should represent a third of the food choices you're making, whether eating out or at home and when you're shopping. And there you'll see at a glance that there's lots of different colours highlighted, so there's illustrations of the variety of vegetables that are available and fruits, and the colours highlight the fact that there's a lot of choice, but also the colours do represent the fact that vegetables and fruits contain different qualities. So for example, lots of red vegetables contain something called lycopene, which is good for the cardiovascular system. Orange vegetables tend to contain more beta carotene, and so on. So we'll go into that further. With regards to the Eat Well Guide, obviously there's a little bit of background information, and if I could just read one section from there, it's with regards to what's included. It suggests all fruit and veg, including fresh, frozen, canned, dried and juiced varieties, should be selected. Potatoes don't count, it repeats itself, as they are considered a starchy carbohydrate food. It references the portion sizes, so you're looking at 80 grams per portion, 30 grams if it's dried, and 150 ml, which is the maximum recommended amount of juice. This is the case basically because potentially they contain a lot of sugar. It goes on in the final section to have healthy snacks with you ideally. Try and choose 5 portions a day and avoid things that are high in fat, salt and sugar. So what can we learn in addition to the Eat Well Guide to help us make better food choices? So what we need to do is look at the food supply chain. So traditionally we had a situation where the source of the food, or the origin, the farmer's field, the garden or the allotment, would be very close to the home, and therefore the transfer of food from the source to the destination, the plate, would be very quick, and we didn't have a problem with nutrient deficiency, for example, in the past. Over decades now, the industrial processes of refining, manufacturing, packaging have led to certain concerns in regard to this area. So today we've got a more circuitous route where the food goes from the origin and takes a much longer path. So for example, the farmer's field there might be intensively farmed nowadays. They used to operate a 3-field system where fields would lay fallow and regain their nutrient value. Maybe that's not the case so much now. Farmers are using more pesticides, obviously to prevent from exposure to bugs and to increase yields, but that can produce problems with regards to depletion in nutrient value of the soil and the product and the end product. We've got transport links, obviously, where it goes from the farmer's field to the factory for processing and packaging, and then obviously from the factory to the store. Again, there's storage there at this point, and then there's transportation from the store via the people that purchase the products to the home. Secondary storage there can also cause a problem, and eventually then it's prepared and served up on the plate. So at this stage, with a longer route, we're exposing the food to a longer timeline and more processing, refining, and that generally depletes the nutrients over time. Coupled with that, we've got people on busy lifestyles that don't have very good eating habits, for example, or maybe on restricted diets. So this total sort of combination can lead to problems with regards to deficiencies, potentially the development of conditions and illnesses. So with regards to vitamins and minerals, fruits and vegetables, what are we concerned with? We're concerned with vitamins. A, D, E and K were historically highlighted as the fat-soluble ones. They were simply discovered in fat sources first, and then B and C were discovered later with regards to water-soluble, or classified as water-soluble sources, But actually what you'll find is Even though E and K are fat soluble, you will find them in fruits and vegetables. D is the one that you won't find apart from something like alfalfa, so it's pretty negligible. A you can find in certain vegetable sources, but it's not in plentiful supply. We're concerned with minerals, major and trace minerals there, for example, and then we've got fibre, which includes pectin, gums, and basically polysaccharides. So the food supply chain is an issue, and here I've highlighted basically the last mile. So what tends to happen is obviously the recommendations were fresh, frozen, canned, dried or juiced. These have pros and cons basically. So with regards to the guide, it says suggest try and select fresh, for example. Now fresh is great because obviously it contains less opportunity for the vitamins and minerals to leach out. However, due to the nature of the fact they are fresh, time causes depletion of the constituents quite quickly. Frozen is great because obviously sometimes you can package items immediately very close to the origin of the food, next to the farmer's field. That's great. However, obviously it requires secondary storage, and then there are issues with handling the items afterwards. Canned often involves sterilisation or irradiation. So you take a fresh product, it can potentially deplete in its nutrient value, and then you expose it to some secondary processing, which is a sort of secondary hit to the nutrient value. Alternatively, however, canned, if it's performed quickly, can lock in nutrients until the can is opened, obviously. Dried tends to, or fruits and vegetables tend to contain a lot of fibre. They don't contain a lot of vitamins which are leached out. And juiced varieties, obviously this refers to packaged items that you might buy from the supermarket in cartons or bottles. Obviously you can juice products at home if they're fresh. You've got two options there with juicing at home. You've got a masticating juicer or a centrifugal. Centrifugal juicers tend to spin the citrus fruit, for example. That exposes it to oxygen, and oxidation causes a loss of vitamins, for example. Masticating juicers tend to be for the harder fruits or vegetables. They crush them. Because it's not exposing the constituents or the product to as much oxygen, they tend to be better in value with regards to their nutrient content, and the enzymes aren't depleted and they're allowed to do that, basically go to work. With regards to supermarket choices, I don't know how these companies prepare their juices, but obviously there's issues there with nutrient loss, and then also potentially added sugars, which is highlighted in the Eat Well guide. So if we take a closer look at the vitamins, we've got the fat soluble and water soluble. Okay, we are concerned with vitamins A, B, C, D, E and K. Fat soluble are highlighted in red. B and C are water soluble, are highlighted in blue. So the ticks represent how stable the vitamin is to heat generally. You'll see the fat soluble regarded as quite stable to heat, and that means that exposure to heat doesn't tend to deplete their nutrient content too much. The second category goes a little bit further into that. So let's take, for example, vitamin A. So now vitamin A is highlighted in green because it is found in certain vegetables, even though it's regarded as fat soluble. It's tend to be highlighted as stable under heat, and it's classified as fairly stable, F for fairly. But the problem with vitamin A is exposure to light or oxygen tends to deplete it. And in the case of an oil, I appreciate that's not fruit or vegetable, but in the case of an oil, if you leave a lid off a bottle of oil, then the oxygen and light do their thing and deplete the vitamin from the product. Vitamin B is water soluble. It's good for the nervous system. It's not very stable to heat, so poor cooking practices tend to deplete it. And it's regarded as fairly stable, but this is highly affected by the cooking practices, which we'll come on to. Vitamin C, regarded as unstable. Obviously there's a cross. Cooking, processing and preservation all deplete this vitamin. So it's great in fresh food if you eat it quickly, but basically it depletes over time quite quickly. Sometimes you'll find a better source of frozen or canned versions of vitamin C than you would do a fresh, but it really does depend on how the product's handled. Vitamin D, now this is vitamins highlighted in black. Your sources for vitamin D tend to be sort of dairy and fish, for example, and obviously the body creates its own with exposure to light. And then we've got vitamin D, is stable and doesn't tend to be affected. Okay, and then vitamin E is regarded as stable, fairly stable. However, freezing the items will deplete it, and if it's not correctly frozen food isn't correctly handled, then it's depleted. And also, but canning actually is an example of a good situation where a positive benefit of canning, where a vitamin is locked in. Again, it depends on how you handle the can after you've bought it from the supermarket, but we'll go further into that. And vitamin K is regarded as fairly stable. With regards to the minerals, we've got major and trace, and this came about historically. The major minerals were discovered first, then the trace ones, and there's actually another subsection of minerals that have been discovered later still, but we won't include those today. So you're looking at things like calcium, phosphorus, calcium, phosphorus, sodium, iron, iodine, potassium, magnesium. So let's use examples. So sodium and potassium are important for nerve signal conduction. Calcium's important for muscular contraction. Iron, obviously, for oxygen transportation in the blood. You've then got trace minerals. Let's see what they are: copper, zinc, manganese, molybdenum. Let me read that. Sorry, I can't read it backwards. Molybdenum, selenium, and chromium. I won't go into those two greatly, but imagine something, or let's consider something like chromium as an example. That's utilised in insulin metabolism, and we discussed that effects of insulin in the first talk. So if you're consuming, for example, very starchy and sugary foods, then you'll need a greater supply of chromium because insulin's being pumped out and utilises chromium in the metabolic process. Why do I mention this? Well, it's just to highlight that obviously we need to highlight the subcategories. You can look on labels and read about and look up online and look into books with regards to constituent values and what you might need as a recommended daily intake. But it's just to highlight that your behaviour will affect the quantities required, your activities and lifestyle, the behaviours of the choices you're making with regards to the diet. So just be aware that sometimes recommended daily amounts might be insufficient if you're behaving in a certain way. Fibre we'll come on to, but we're concerned with things like lignin, pectin and gums. Okay, so here's a digestive system. Effectively, we eat food, don't we? At point 1, that's transferred into the stomach. At point 2, excuse me, it then is digested and enters the small intestine at 3, and then into the larger intestine and colon at point 5. Essentially, we're concerned with bacteria, fungus and enzymes, and these are the products that digest food. What happens is the foodstuffs contain bacteria in less or greater supply. So fresh food, for example, if it's not washed, might contain more bacteria than something like canned food, which is irradiated or sterilised. But then that enters the gut. And the important point I mention this for is because there's a section in the gut called the cecum, and at that point of the digestive tract, then food is actually fermented. So bacteria, fungus and enzymes act on the food products themselves to transform them and to provide various advantages in that situation, which we'll come on to. It's important to note that the increased consumption of fibre helps with this specific area of the gut. Okay, so fibre is essential part of our diet, and it's generally long chain or fibre is generally the gums, pectins, and lignins are generally long chain polysaccharides. They're difficult constituents and products to break down. Some of them aren't broken down, so they act in a way to, for example, bulk out your digestive system to provide satiety or the feeling of fullness, so you don't consume too much, for example. It provides bulk to aid with your digestive sort of passage and what's called peristalsis, so it will help with mass to eradicate certain byproducts. It also prevents or slows down, for example, the transfer and excretion of certain products. So we touched on that with regards to insulin, for example. It slows down the release of glucose. So to go back to the initial talk, obviously a plate of chips isn't necessarily a healthy option, but if you were to sit down and eat a plate of chips with a salad and use that knowledge to your advantage, you greatly slow the rate of release of what is effectively a bad carbohydrate, ignoring the oils, that is, and it lowers the peak of the insulin release, or the glucose release, sorry. That places less demand on the insulin, and simply having a salad there by the side of the plate and eating it obviously would help. So fiber's critical. Some of it's not meant to, or isn't actually digested. And what it does is it acts in a couple of ways. It basically provides a fuel effectively for the bacteria, the enzymes, and the fungi that perform the fermentation in the gut. We can excuse me. We can classify the cells of the body as eukaryotes. And so our cells are we're a multicellular organism, but our DNA is fixed, so it's not changeable. Whereas a bacteria, for example, is a prokaryote, and that has a free floating structure, so it picks up DNA and discards DNA at will, so it has the ability to change. So this bacteria forms kind of like communities in the gut, if you will, and they're called commensals. So to give you an example, in the mouth there's 700, up to 700 different types of bacteria, which are regarded as they're sort of living on the host, effectively living within us. In the cecum or the gut, there's over 1 trillion and they outnumber DNA cells by about 10 to 1. So there's huge numbers of bacteria present, and we kind of live in a symbiotic relationship. So fibre, for example, can be regarded as a prebiotic. It basically isn't digested, and it provides bacterial growth for these communities of good bacteria in the gut, and they can go to work and perform their function, which we'll touch on shortly. You've also got a situation where you've got probiotics. So probiotics are live organisms. So obviously fibre isn't a live organism as such, but probiotics are. So you might be aware of the probiotics in supermarkets. You've got, for example, yogurts. Another source is a ferment. So Yakult, for example, is a ferment, and you've got the other items such as Danone, for example, which are yogurts. With regards to the microorganisms, companies have been wrapped on the knuckles with regards to their claims about the benefit. What the companies tend to do is isolate certain strains of bacteria, and then in the hope that this will promote good health. They have to be careful with their claims, but basically they are considered as live organisms which are good for the health of the host. And this is important because there's been a lot of research lately on, and this is advancing with regards to the gut-brain axis. So there's lots of benefits to be had from consuming products that encourage fermentation, such as fibre, promote the propensity for good bacteria in the gut, such as live probiotics. But also there's another movement where people will actually ferment their own foodstuffs, and this is historically been massive over time. Okay, so basically, I've just taken a few little quotes from some of the information I've been reading. So, what fermentation does, whether that's in the gut or actually whether you're fermenting food separately at home and then consuming it, fermentation provides a number of benefits. So, for example, it's pre-digestion of nutrients into more accessible, bioavailable forms. Nutritional enhancement and creation of unique micronutrients that otherwise wouldn't be available. Detoxification, transformation of anti-nutrients into nutrients. So some of the harmful substances are actually used for our benefit, mysteriously. And then it touches on lab cultures, so live cultures, for example, present and alive in certain ferments, but not all of them. Why is this important? This is important because it acts as another source of food which isn't mentioned in the Eat Well guide. So you might inadvertently consume something that's fermented. For example, traditionally pickles stored in vinegar. But what's happened is the actual quality of the ferments, because through industrialisation has lowered their value. So we're not getting as much fermented food in our diet as we once did. It used to form the basis for preservation and storage, and through a haphazard approach of preservation and storage over the years, things have gone off, or they've cooked in their own juices. And so, for example, that presents people have learned from that, and now this sort of knowledge of fermentation has been handed down over the centuries. But we've kind of lost that art as such, and it's something you could look into to enhance your diet. So, with regards to tips on how to improve your diet, okay, or what to do to improve your exposure to nutrients, and we've got sunlight. Obviously, sunlight exposes you to vitamin D, or allows your body to create vitamin D, which is good for the strength of the bones. Grow your own vegetables. Whether it's a garden box or out in the back garden, a window box, sorry, or out in the back garden, you're closer to your food source, and you can pick those items at the last minute to transfer them to the plate. Choose a lot of variety that when you see it, whether it's in a farm shop, supermarket shelf. A variety provides you with a vast array of nutrients. Obviously, do your research with regards to what products have what constituents in them. Storage is important. So with regards to storage, do follow the storage instructions. To give you an example, frozen food shouldn't be defrosted before use. Canned food should be used immediately and not stored in the fridge. Focus on the amount of storage time also. Like if you're purchasing items that are out of date, then they will be depleted in nutrients. A good example is the salads that are purchased, where the bag starts to expand, it fills with air, and it's really on its last legs, it's wilted, it's not going to contain a lot of nutritional value. I appreciate it saves you money, but there's something to think about there. And then with regards to preparation, so yeah, don't defrost frozen. Use a pressure cooker. It's been demonstrated if you cook things at a high heat, or basically if you cook things for slower for longer, i.e. like a casserole, for example, it's going to lose more nutrients than if you cook something at a high heat. So bring out the pressure cooker from under the staircase or out of the cupboard, the one that you're not using, and start to try and use it. Similarly, when you're boiling items, whether it's frozen or fresh, cut them. Don't cut them too quick, long before your consumption. So cut them at the very last minute and throw them into a pan of boiling water, and that way it's not exposed to as much oxygen and the enzymes don't start to degrade their nutritional content. Put lids on when you are boiling. This traps the air and doesn't expose the water to more oxygen. If you bring it up to a boiling point before you place vegetables in, then actually the air, some of the oxygen's been sort of excreted out of the water, so there's less exposure and depletion there. You can also do things like maybe provide a little bit of acid to the water, and that creates more crispiness, but that's more concerned with texture. So boiling tends to leach out these essential vitamins especially, but also maybe chromium, for example, and that produces like a depletion in its good value basically. Eat it straight away. Try not to use leftovers. If you eat the item there and then, if you do store it in the fridge, so be it, but basically the highest nutritional content is as soon as you put it on the plate. With regards to canned food, I mentioned obviously there's a secondary sterilisation and irradiation. If you do open it, try and eat it straight away. Don't store it in the fridge and expect it to have the same nutritional value. Stir fries are a great option. There was a news report on, or a article on Radio 4 years ago that I remember, and they spoke about the variety of tools that the Europeans have in a kitchen. So let's say, for example, a knife rack. You've seen them in the stores. You've got 8 or 9 different knives for different tasks, whereas the Chinese had 2 or 3 items, some chopsticks, and a big chopping knife, basically. I forget the term now, but that item could be used for crushing, chopping, grinding. So it was a multi-purpose tool. But they went on to explain about how the Chinese generally, because of it was a poorer economy over the centuries, would chop their items into, or foods into smaller items and flash fry them because fuel was expensive. So it cut down on the cooking time. So compare stir frying to, say, a casserole boiling. Europeans that were wealthier would tend to sort of boil things to death. Obviously that can provide advantages with regards to tenderising meat, but at the same time lots of vitamins and minerals might be lost in that process. Compared to, say, the Chinese communities that would flash fry, and therefore a crisp to bite vegetable would contain more nutrients and cost you less in fuel. So actually a really healthy source. So think about maybe bringing the wok out and stir frying if you can. Roasting's quite good. There's something called the Maillard reaction, which basically provides sweetness to vegetables. If you choose items that are quite dense vegetables, then put them in the roasting dish first and choose the items that might perish, such as, say, a broccoli or a courgette especially, last. Don't allow them to sweat. They've got to be exposed to high heat. So get the oven up nice and high. Remember the rule about cook at a very high heat for a shorter period of time. You're going to lose less nutrients. Similarly, the roasting seals the product, and while it cooks in oils, you're going to have a slightly better nutritional content. Yeah, that's referencing to maybe if you can chop your vegetables into larger pieces rather than smaller pieces because of the enzyme degradation. So let's say, for example, a butternut squash or an aubergine, if you cut it in half rather than cut it into little pieces, you can roast it. You can eat it out of the skin, and it's going to contain more nutrients than something that's cut up into small pieces. Obviously, steam's a very good source. So steam, you're going to get less leaching of these essential vitamins into the water. So do try and pull your steamer out if you've got one. Griddle pans obviously cook at a very high heat, and some of the food isn't actually in contact with the pan, so that may well retain some of the nutrient value. Microwave apparently has been cited as, while I personally wouldn't recommend it, I know some people love them, so microwave food can actually retain some nutrients in comparison to other cooking options. I've put soup at the end because basically these days we don't utilise our resources enough. So if you do cook with, follow these good practices or otherwise with fruit and vegetables and boil things, Do try and use the water afterwards for example, gravy. Soup is a good source. Try not to store it in the fridge, because if you store it in the fridge, it will start depleting regardless of what you pack it in. So try and use it straight away. You could even give it to pets and animals if you had them, because obviously, for example, watering down dog biscuits to make them more palatable for an animal, you're packing those dog biscuits with fruits and veg, vitamins and minerals. So something to think about there. So just to surmise, we've got and one other thing was to go online and do research fermented foods. It's a bit of a growth movement. We've kind of lost the art. There's lots of information out there online. I could post some links. I don't want to necessarily plug certain companies, but there are books you can buy. I've tried it myself. Sauerkraut's a good example, and it provides variety to your diet. It's not necessarily touched on in the Eat Well guide, and there are numerous advantages, such as the benefit to gut and mental health, and obviously allowing you to get more sort of money out of your food effectively, in the sense of releasing nutrients and making them more bioavailable and ultimately better for us. There's a little bit of a summation in the book that I just wanted to read out. So, how to avoid vitamin loss. I guess to a certain extent this would apply to minerals also. Use the freshest produce you can get, rather than foods which have been on the shelf for days. If possible, buy your vegetables on a daily basis in the market or from your local greengrocer. Greengrocers obviously tend to have food in more frequent supply than a supermarket, which allegedly can store them in warehouses for periods of time. Use as little water as possible in preparing washing and soaking. When you are washing and soaking, try not to damage them, because they wilted vegetables lose their good content. Choose to eat fruits and vegetables raw, except where this causes indigestion. Peel fruit and vegetable as little as possible, and make only sparing use of the grater. Avoid long, slow cooking. Avoid keeping food warm for too long. Keep cooking water to use in soup. It contains water-soluble vitamins. It's preferable to cook vegetables on steam rather than water. Organise your cooking so as to avoid having leftovers to refrigerate and heat up. Choose quality over quantity, selecting organically grown items where possible. Roasting or grilling meat retains the most vitamins. That's obviously with reference to the fat-soluble vitamins. Frozen foods are richer in vitamins than tinned ones. And keep milk away from light. So you might want to pop down and just make sure when you close your fridge door that the light's going off. So I hope that's helpful. I believe that ends the talk. I just want to see if there's any other useful information I can mention. Yes. With regards to gut health and mental health, do try and research this. I'll post some links online. But basically, items that are collagen boosting, for example, bone broth and salmon are good sources. High fibre foods, which we've touched on: broccoli, Brussels, oats, peas, avocado, pears, bananas, berries. They're not the only sources. Look into it, but think about the sources that you're choosing, and obviously storage, preparation and consumption. Foods high in omega-3 fatty acids: salmon, mackerel and flax if you're a vegetarian. Omega-3s are obviously an oil. We're going to come on to that in one of the next talks. If not the next one, then the final talk. So I hope you find that useful. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.